I stood in my backyard, watching flames consume my graduation gown. My stepsister had just set my graduation gown on fire, and her mother didn't blink. Tears blurred my vision as I rushed forward with a bucket of water, but it was already too late. The navy blue fabric twisted and blackened, turning years of sacrifice into ash. I didn't fight, but later I called the cops. Before I go on, I'd really love to know where you're listening from. Tell me in the comments, and if you think you can handle the drama ahead, then subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Rhonda, I'm 25 years old, and I just graduated with distinction from nursing school. It should have been the proudest moment of my life. The culmination of years spent studying through exhaustion, holding onto one singular dream. Making my late mother proud. She died when I was 12, leaving a hole in my world that never quite healed. I still remember the smell of her perfume, the way she'd brush my hair before bed, the warmth of her voice when she'd call me her little nurse after I'd bandaged my dolls. Those memories were all I had left of her. After her death, my father Andrew remarried. Her name was Tanya, a divorced woman whose ex-husband was serving time in prison for forgery and theft.
I should have seen the warning signs then.
Tanya came into our lives with her daughter Karen, who was 8 years old at the time. From the very first day, I noticed something was wrong. Karen was rude, mischievous, and openly disrespectful. The first week she lived with us, she broke my late mother's music box, the only thing I had left that still played her favorite lullaby. When I cried, Karen shrugged and walked away. No apology. No remorse.
Just cold indifference.
Our house quickly split into two camps. My father and me on one side, Tanya and Karen on the other. It was never a home. It was a battlefield where peace was always temporary, always fragile, always bought with my father's silence. Growing up in that house in Greenville, South Carolina, I learned what inequality looked like up close. Whenever Karen misbehaved, my father tried to correct her gently, the way any responsible parent would. But Tanya would erupt. She would scream that he had no right to scold her daughter, that Karen was her responsibility, not his. Her voice would echo through the hallways, sharp and bitter, turning simple corrections into full-scale wars. Yet when I made even the smallest mistake, forgetting to wash a dish or staying out 10 minutes past curfew, Tanya's voice filled every room. She yelled at me for things Karen did, without consequence. My father, a quiet man who hated confrontation more than he hated injustice, often stayed silent. He would retreat to his study, close the door, and pretend he couldn't hear. He wanted peace in his home. So he chose silence over truth. And every time he did, a small part of me withered. I knew he loved me, but I wished his love didn't mean staying silent when I needed his voice. Every argument in that house started because Dad tried to do the right thing, and ended because he chose peace over fairness. I grew up craving a mother's love I would never receive.
Tanya tolerated me.
She never loved me. And Karen? Karen simply hated me. I saw it in the way she'd smirk when Tanya scolded me. The way she'd purposely leave messes for me to clean. The way she'd whisper under her breath just loud enough for me to hear, "Nobody wants you here." Each word was a small cut, and over the years, those cuts accumulated until I felt like I was bleeding all the time. There was one moment years ago that should have been a warning. My grandmother came to visit, my father's mother. She tried, at first, to be kind to Karen. She offered advice, tried to connect, treated her like family. She brought Karen a gift, a beautiful scarf she'd knitted herself, every stitch made with care. But Karen responded with cold sneers and sharp words. One afternoon, after Grandma gently corrected her behavior at the dinner table, Karen looked my grandmother in the eye and said, "You're just an old fool who doesn't understand anything." The room went silent. My father's fork clattered against his plate. My grandmother's face fell, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. What shocked her more was Tanya's response. Indifference. Next morning, Grandma packed her bags. I watched from my bedroom doorway as she folded her clothes with slow, deliberate movements, her hands trembling slightly. She told my father she couldn't stay in a house where a teenager acted that way and her mother couldn't control her. Tanya snapped back immediately, her voice dripping with venom. "Then you're free to leave." And Grandma did. She left shaking her head, sorrow written across her face. She hugged me tightly before she went, whispering in my ear, "You're stronger than all of this, sweetheart. Don't let them break you." Even Grandma couldn't stand the chaos. But I had no choice. I lived in it, day after day, year after year. The years passed slowly. I buried myself in my studies, in my dream of becoming a nurse. It was the one thing no one could take from me. I spent countless nights at the library, studying until the security guard had to ask me to leave. I worked weekends at a diner, saving every dollar I earned, smelling like grease and coffee when I finally crawled into bed. When graduation day finally arrived, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I woke up early that morning, my heart pounding with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through my window, painting golden stripes across my bedroom floor. I had ironed the gown the night before, smooth and looking smart. I pictured myself in it, proud and confident. A smile broke across my face. Today was going to be the best day of my life. But that morning, something strange happened that broke my heart. As I stood in my room reviewing my speech one last time, I heard a sound outside. A crackling, hissing noise that didn't belong. My stomach tightened. I walked to the window and looked down into the backyard. My heart stopped. My navy blue graduation gown was burning on the ground, flames dancing across the fabric like cruel spirits. I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, raw and desperate. I ran downstairs, barefoot, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. The morning dew soaked through my socks, cold and shocking. I grabbed a bucket, filled it with water, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. I poured it desperately over the flames, watching the water hiss and steam. But the gown was already ruined, charred beyond saving. I stood there trembling, holding the burned edges, staring at the destruction. The fabric crumbled in my fingers, leaving black stains on my palms. It wasn't just fabric. It was everything I had worked for. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment I dreamed of this day, reduced to ash in my backyard. My father rushed outside, his face pale with shock. He was still in his pajamas, his hair disheveled. He grabbed my shoulders, his voice shaking. "Rhonda, what happened?" I couldn't answer. My throat had closed. Tanya followed moments later, tying her robe slowly, deliberately. She said nothing. Her expression was carefully blank, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something she couldn't quite hide. A glint of satisfaction. We all knew who did it. We exchanged glances, silent accusations hanging in the air like smoke.
Karen.
But there was no evidence. No witnesses. Just a burned gown and a family that refused to speak the truth. From her bedroom window upstairs, Karen watched. I couldn't see her, but I felt her presence, felt her eyes on me, felt her enjoying this. Later, I would learn she had been laughing quietly, savoring the destruction like it was a victory. My father didn't waste a second. He grabbed his keys without a word and drove off. Tanya walked back inside. I stood alone in that backyard, holding the blackened fabric, feeling something inside me begin to break. The smell of burnt synthetic fiber clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I would smell it for days. Every time I caught that scent, I would remember this moment. 2 hours later, my father returned, soaked from the rain, clutching a garment bag. "They had one last gown left," he said, breathing hard. "Same style, same color. You're not missing this ceremony." I pressed the fabric to my chest and finally broke down. At the ceremony that afternoon, I wore the replacement gown my father had bought. It didn't fit quite right, hanging loose in some places and tight in others. The fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar, nothing like the gown I had chosen with such care months earlier. But when I walked into the auditorium and saw my father sitting in the audience, his eyes warm with pride, I felt a flicker of joy. For a moment, I forgot about the burnt gown. The ceremony passed in a blur of speeches and applause. I walked across the stage with my father, bowed my head as he pinned me, the moment I dreamed of for years. I smiled for the camera. My father clapped louder than anyone else, his face beaming. In that instant, I felt loved. That evening, when we returned home, the house felt heavier somehow. The air was thick with unspoken truths. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I found Karen in the hallway, her expression smug and unbothered, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I confronted her quietly, my voice trembling but firm. "I know you burned my gown," I said. Karen paused. She looked up slowly, meeting my eyes. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then her lips curved into a slow, mocking smile. She laughed softly, a low sound that made my skin crawl. "Prove it," she sneered, brushing past me without another word, her shoulder deliberately bumping mine. In that moment, I realized something. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep waiting for justice in a house that refused to see the truth. So, I made a decision. I moved out. I rented a small apartment across town, a tiny studio with creaky floors and a window that overlooked a parking lot. But it was mine. I found a job at a hospital and began rebuilding my life piece by piece. I worked long shifts, came home to silence, and slowly learned what peace felt like. Real peace. Not the tense quiet of my father's house, but the deep calm of a space where no one wanted to hurt me. For the first time, my peace wasn't negotiable. Months passed. I settled into a rhythm. Work, rest, small moments of joy. A cup of coffee on my balcony. A book before bed. Conversations with colleagues who respected me. I thought the worst was behind me until I received a message that almost gave me a heart attack. I was a rainy afternoon, and I was off duty. While I sat on my couch watching TV, my phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. Check cleared, $7,500. I frowned. I didn't remember writing any check. My pulse quickened. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the bank, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. At the counter, the teller pulled up the scanned image of the check. My stomach dropped. It was my signature. Perfectly forged. And the check was made out to Karen Harris. That's when everything made sense. The sudden visit. The false kindness. The urgency to leave. My mind raced back to the previous weekend. Karen had shown up at my apartment unexpectedly. It shocked me. She had never visited before. She claimed she just wanted to check up on me, acting unusually kind, almost sisterly. She complimented my apartment, asked about my job, smiled at all the right moments. I thought maybe she had changed. Maybe time had softened her. Maybe growing up had given her perspective. We sat and talked awkwardly for a while. I went to the kitchen to make us coffee, feeling cautiously hopeful that maybe we could finally have a real relationship. While I was gone, Karen slipped into my room. She found my checkbook in a drawer, tore out a page, and quietly tucked it into her bag. When I returned with 2 cups of coffee, Karen suddenly said she had to leave. Something urgent had come up, she claimed, her tones suddenly rushed. I stood there confused, holding both cups, watching her hurry out the door. I didn't know she had already stolen from me. I didn't know that the sister I'd hoped for never existed. I walked out of the bank, resolved to put an end to her madness. I called the cops, then drove to my father's house gripping the printed image of the forged check. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Rage and grief battled inside me. When I walked inside, Karen sat on the couch pretending to scroll through her phone. My father looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Tanya's smile faded when she saw my expression. I laid the paper on the table. "This is the check you wrote," I said, my voice steady. "The one you signed in my name." My father leaned forward, his face tightening as he read Karen's name written in bold letters. The newspaper fell from his hands. He didn't know what was going on. Karen's face drained of color. "I was going to pay it back," she stammered, her voice rising with panic. "The seller was threatening me. I didn't mean to steal from you." That's when the truth came spilling out. My father, his voice heavy with shame, explained everything. Karen had bought a designer handbag, expensive shoes, and a silver necklace on credit. Living beyond her means, trying to impress people who didn't care. The seller began harassing her daily, demanding payment. They even sent a final warning letter to my father's house. Tanya had asked my father to help settle the bill, but he refused. He had scolded him for not helping her daughter, saying he was heartless for letting Karen suffer. She panicked, saying she didn't want a debt collector showing up at their door, embarrassing them in front of the neighbors. Karen had asked Tanya to relax and promised she would find a way to pay. Her way was my checkbook. She wrote herself a check for $7,500, forged my signature perfectly, mimicking the loops and curves like she'd practiced. She deposited it using her mobile banking app. She left a digital trail behind. Like her father, she was a forger. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. Tanya tried to defend her. "Please, Rhonda, just see it as a loan. She'll pay you back when she gets a job." Karen nodded desperately. "Yes, I'll pay you back as soon as..." Before she could finish, there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. "Karen Harris?" one asked. "You're under arrest for check forgery and theft." Tanya jumped up, her voice trembling with panic. "Wait, please. She's just a child." "Rhonda, stop them. She's your sister." I stood still, my eyes calm. "She's not my sister," I said. And she knew exactly what she was doing. As the officers led Karen out in handcuffs, tears streaming down her face, my father turned away, his shoulders slumped. Silent and ashamed. I walked to my car in the stillness of the evening. Justice had been served, not through anger, but through truth. Karen was sentenced to 6 months of community service and put on probation since it was her first recorded offense. But the judge ordered her to pay me back the full $7,500 or face jail time. She couldn't afford it. When the deadline approached, Tanya, desperate to keep her daughter out of prison, paid every cent. She pawned her prized jewelry, emptied her savings account, borrowed from relatives. For once, it wasn't me who paid the price. Back in my apartment, I sat by the window as rain tapped softly against the glass. The city lights blurred through the drops. I closed my checkbook, locked it in a drawer, and exhaled deeply. I grew up thinking silence was peace. But real peace is when no one can steal from your life anymore. Looking back now, I see everything clearly. The burnt gown, the stolen money, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. Some wounds don't need revenge. Time, truth, and karma are enough. I walk through the hospital corridor every day now, my nursing badge shining under the fluorescent lights. I'm proud of who I've become. Not because anyone celebrated me, but because I chose myself. Family isn't blood. It's who doesn't burn your gown or forge your name. If you've ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace, this story is for you. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever felt invisible in your own home. Subscribe if you believe in protecting your peace, no matter the cost. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. And sometimes that's exactly when your life begins.